Hey, long time no see. I know you and I have a lot of catching up to do, but I'm gonna save that stuff for the end. For now, though, I want to let you guys know that I've been doing a lot of reading. 2021 was the year where I finally sat down and said, hey, I love Batman so much. I've barely scratched the surface of his comics history. Why not actually read some of his most iconic and more unknown stories? And that's exactly what I did, or have been doing, and still is doing, are doing. Am doing? That's what I'm doing. Yeah. Long story short, this list...
Batman by Scott Snyder is my all-time favorite comic book run, and Scott Snyder is my favorite writer in general. I think some of the best Batman stories are Batman Hush, Batman Dark Victory, The Long Halloween, Black Mirror, Batman Earth 1, and Dark Detective, to name a few. I think Nightfall is one of, if not the greatest books ever made. Those being my favorite stories could very well change in the future, especially if I cover them.
Along with some of my other takes, have wildly changed. I'd love to highlight some of the fantastic stories I've come across this last year, so I thought it'd be pretty cool to start with one of the first that stuck out to me. Published May 1990, Detective Comics issue 614 was written by Alan Grant and drawn by Norm Breyfogle. It's practically a one-off issue, very low stakes compared to other Batman stories. Someone might even label it as filler. And while it's a story that doesn't kickstart an entire arc or change the status quo, I think it still has a ton of merit. I mean, come on. It'd be pretty silly to write off material as filler or non-important when it can actually have genuinely fantastic writing in it. I believe it's a story that utilizes Batman and his setting in a very effective manner to say something heartfelt and true not only to this character, but also to the real world. It has a lot of really small details that add up to make for fantastic action and compelling characterization. It is by no means the 12 Angry Men or Shawshank Redemption of Batman stories, but we'll get to those at some point. I just think it's a story with some really valuable writing lessons regarding character, action, and world. The story opens with Batman stalking a group of young thieves. He's been watching them for well over an hour and reflecting on what he was doing when he was around their age, which is when we get our second narrative that will coincide with the main story. Bruce defines just how much opportunity and privilege he had growing up compared to most Gotham residents, which will become a much larger element later in the story. After hours of schooling, a young Bruce takes a cab to Crime Alley in East Gotham. Back in the present, Batman decides to let the kids take the goods, as he believes they will lead him to a larger operation. The kids arrive at a junkyard and are greeted by Brute, one of the older members of the Gotham Street Demons, a gang that has been present long before Batman was even a thing. He shows off one of the crossbows that the crew stole from a sports shop earlier in the day. One of the kids asks where the rest of the gang is, and Brute explains that most everyone is out in the streets, preventing a takeover from rival gangs, so there are less than a dozen men at the junkyard. Brute sends one of the demons out to stand guard. Batman swings over the guard and onto another roof. This will become important momentarily. The kids follow Brute into their lair to greet two other demons. They negotiate payment, and Brute offers to pay the kids in drugs. One of them initially rejects the offer as they need money to support themselves, but another offers that they take the drugs to sell them. Batman is then reminded of when he was offered drugs by a pusher on his way to Crime Alley. History continues to repeat itself. We're back with young Bruce. He is approached by a rather kind homeless woman begging for cash. He hands over a few dollars and makes his way over to Crime Alley. He drops a rose on the ground, reaffirming that he will get justice for his parents. He's then greeted by a group of street demons, with the story cutting back to the present. Angered by the obvious manipulation of these young kids, Batman jumps down through the skylight, taking out the three demons. This is incredible. A major praise I have for this comic is its strength and continuity with this sequence. Everyone and everything has a reason for being there, so let's break it all down. Batman drops down from the skylight and immediately kicks Brute to the wall, rendering him useless for a brief moment. The kids escape as the fight goes on. One of the demons reaches for a crossbow. He shoots, barely missing Batman and hitting a demon about to attack Batman. He flips over the table, delivering his leg straight into the crossbow demon's face. Wait a minute. Why does that guy have a crossbow? Which is a question I asked myself when I initially read this story. But if we rewind a few minutes, they establish earlier on that the demons hit a sports store that morning, which explains its presence. But wait, Brute was the one with the crossbow. Where's his? I'm glad you asked. Right before the flashback, Brute sets the crossbow on the table to get the money and drugs to give to the kids. It didn't suddenly disappear for Brute and appear for this guy. After kicking the demon and knocking him out, Batman plants himself on the ground, lifting up the table and slamming it into Brute, officially knocking him out. A neat detail to praise here is Brute getting up in the first place. It can be really annoying in media, more specifically animation, when a non-superpowered hero is taking goons out with only one hit that wouldn't typically knock a grown man out. It's even more annoying when it's applied inconsistently. Here, Batman initially kicks Brute in the stomach, which in all reality would only knock the wind out of a person of that size. Brute is knocked down for a few seconds only to get back up, then get hit by the table in the face. And lastly, something I didn't notice until now was the final demon. In a thought bubble, Batman remarks on the sentry goon that's about to get into the room. He kicks the door in, causing the sentry to run right into the door, taking him out. Wait a minute. How did Batman know that sentry would be coming? Where did he even come from? Once again, I'm glad you asked. A few pages earlier, Batman swung right over this guy without anything being said. We get a visual indicator for both us, the audience, and for Batman that this sentry exists. There doesn't need to be inner dialogue or a character pointing it out to us. This is something I believe the medium of comics as a whole is lacking in. There's information that writers insist on spoon feeding to us rather than delivering details in an organic nature. It also makes sense that the guard would be coming this way because there's bound to be a ton of noise. While small in the grand scheme of things, I feel that this visual indicator accomplishes strong continuity, supports Batman's intelligence, and establishes the street demon's awareness. That's 3 different crucial elements you fleshed out with 2 panels in 1 line of inner dialogue. Alongside all of that, we have 4 things set up just pages ago, all with concrete reasoning. Number 1, the crossbow's existence. 2, the location of the crossbow in relation to Brute. Number 3, the sentry placed outside. And number 4, why there are only 3 demons present. I'm honing in on all these different variables because it's very common for a writer to forget fundamental aspects such as continuity. All of these seemingly minor elements that add up to equal the scenes that we get. As much as I love the new Suicide Squad movie, this scene is like continuity poison. Enemies don't respond to screams of teammates getting brutally murdered, and sometimes even watch as our characters casually walk up to them. A quick sidebar, let's talk about continuity, elementary school, and Elmer's glue. Ranging from 1st grade all the way to 7th or 8th grade, I, along with many others, probably did a lot of arts and crafts projects for school, whether it be something as simple as gluing words or pictures alongside other words and pictures to help memorize important lessons, or something more complex like a diorama or a poster board. Point being, a bottle of glue or a glue stick was one of your best friends. You would not have completed those projects without glue. You could also use tape for this analogy, whichever suits you. Similar to you in elementary school, a writer needs continuity. Continuity is like that stick of glue. It's the thing that is connecting your scenes, your ideas, your characters, your themes, setting, everything. And depending on the writer, you could get something that was completed with dollar store, off-brand, cum-colored glue, or you could get something that was completed with top-of-the-line Elmer's disappearing purple school glue sticks. Something that may cost you a bit of extra money, but was worth it in the long run. But for continuity, I'm not talking about money. The costs here are time, thought, and effort. I think a telltale sign of a good writer can most certainly come in their use of setup and payoff, something I touched upon briefly in the last video. When a writer meticulously sets up all these different elements and pays them off later, they are creating stronger continuity. People, objects, places, all have a purpose in history, and when a writer uses those things to their advantage that they set up hours or pages ago, you have the potential to have something pretty damn good on your hands. Of course, the process is a bit more complex than just that brief description. You have to make sure what you're setting up actually makes sense to begin with. It always comes back to keeping in line with the rules you, the writer, established. Just the idea of setting up different objects and characters with the subtlest of visual cues or lines of dialogue can be so satisfying to an audience member. It can be so much more engaging when a writer rewards you for paying attention. You picked up on those details, and your reward for that was being better immersed into that action scene or that final confrontation. And that's why I love this fight so goddamn much. Paying attention granted me the knowledge of knowing why everything was the way it was in this action sequence. My boys Alan and Norm took that Elmer's disappearing purple school glue stick and made an A+ diorama. And you know why? It's because they cared. They took that glue stick and carefully drew squares on the backside of their papers, then neatly placed it into the proper position. They didn't quickly smother it in glue and jam it onto the paper, causing the glue to seep through the edges, or you put it on lopsided. Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. Alan and Norm paid in time, thought, and effort to craft something that is both visually and intellectually satisfying. With all of that being said, though, a criticism could be it is convenient only 3 demons are here at this point in time, right when Batman is pursuing these kids. It's a contrivance, one of which is very possible, mind you, that facilitates this portion of the story. It simply makes Batman's job a bit easier as he has less people to fight. I wouldn't call it a flaw, but rather a convenience. It makes sense given at this point in the timeline, multiple gangs are constantly battling over territory. After defeating the demons, Batman runs out of the building, only to find that the kids have gotten away. Later, Gordon and his men arrive to secure the demons. Gordon remarks on how none of their attempts to prevent substance abuse in kids actually work. No matter the danger, they'll just continue dumping toxic substances into their body as he inhales a cigarette, with Batman remarking on the irony. Batman stops Brute before he can be put into the squad car. He warns that if he goes after the kids, he and his friends will have to answer to Batman, snapping an arrow and placing it into Brute's mouth. Gordon says that Batman's efforts will most likely go to waste. If it's not the demons, drugs will most likely get to the kids. Batman counters, saying that Jim has become cynical in his old age. He has to believe that what they do can make a difference. While it's a short exchange, there are some strong pieces of characterization here for Batman and Gordon. While both characters have an inherent drive for justice, they possess differing outlooks on the decisions they make. Batman's dialogue cements his almost indomitable will. Despite everything he's seen, all the violence and death, he believes he can still make a positive difference. Gordon holds very similar morals to Batman, but these 8 years have definitely taken a toll on his psyche. This line seems to be an indicator of Jim's growing pessimism. Yes, he believes in what they're doing, but the positive impact him and Batman create can sometimes feel meaningless due to the never-ending aspect of their crusade against crime. Being tortured, watching his daughter get crippled, his wife dying, and all of the countless crimes he has to witness is bound to take a toll on a person. Everything that's happened to both the city and Jim is reflected in this one line. This very well could have been Grant planting the seed for Jim's later resignation and his strained relationship with Batman. Back in the past, the demons take the rose Bruce left and begin plucking it in an attempt to taunt him. They begin beating on Bruce and he attempts to fight back. He lands one solid strike but is quickly knocked down. One picks him up, prepared to beat him with a chain wrapped around his wrist. Back to the present and the following day, the group of kids hang outside their school. Batman greets, wait, hang on a minute, how did you find them? Now, it's not explicitly stated how, but I don't really think this is an issue. This story takes place in the East End of Gotham, which is basically the worst part of town. Given these kids have been pushed far enough to commit crime, they are most definitely residents. It's very easy to identify them as kids, so all you need to do now is search schools during the day. Narrow down the search to elementary schools, as Bruce concludes that they shouldn't be any older than 12. Find one closest to the junkyard, and you're likely to find the kids. There's no massive leap in logic here, but rather using what we know about the setting and Batman to make an inference. He knows the city like the back of his hand, and top that with his general detective skills, I think it's fairly easy to find them with all these pieces to work with. This is definitely a huge benefit in fully realizing the world your story takes place in. Sprinkling in all these key details about the setting and the character's connection to it is something else that can be immensely satisfying to break down and analyze when a writer puts that large amount of thought and care into it. Batman tries to convince the kids not to go back to the street demons as they'll be wanting revenge. They will assume it was the kids that got Batman to bust their drug operation. Despite Batman's best efforts though, the kids don't believe the demons would betray them. Batman explains the demons only use people. Once they achieve their goals, they toss out any liabilities. Before Batman can finish, the school's principal arrives, sending the kids home. He describes to Batman all the misfortune the kids and the entire neighborhood has been through. He believes these 4 kids have so much potential, but they all suffer from different financial and familial issues. None of these kids can really afford college. Given the chance, they can make it in the world and do great things. Batman leaves in the Batmobile, making his way back to the junkyard. We cut back to young Bruce about to get his shit pushed in. Before he gets pummeled though, the homeless woman from earlier barrels in and starts beating on the demons. They run off, stealing cash from Bruce. The woman consoles him, calling him a hero for his courage. She hands him coins to use a telephone booth and calls Alfred. Bruce feels bad as he doesn't want to take money from a homeless woman, but she reassures that this is a gift from her. Consider her a fairy godmother. Back to the present, the kids roll up to the junkyard only to find a group of demons on their bikes, equipped with bats and chains. They try to convince the demons that they didn't mean to lead Batman back to base, but they don't care. Both men and drugs have been nabbed by the cops, and someone needs to pay for that. They begin chasing the kids on their bikes, making it a sport for their own entertainment. Batman arrives at the perfect moment, knocking 2 of the demons off their bikes. He tells them if anyone's to blame, it's him. He got their men and drugs taken away. The leader of the group drives straight at Batman. He sidesteps and kicks the demon off the bike. It turns out that this demon was the one that beat on Bruce in the flashback, so Batman says that he's owed him this for a long time, which is very contrived. It's not consequential, but the likelihood of this demon being here at this time, confronting the guy he just so happened to assault as a kid, yeah, that's a stretch for me. Anyways, Batman challenges the rest of the demons, but they all end up driving away out of fear. I find it odd that none of the demons seem to have guns. I understand that with the kids, they're making a game out of dealing with them. They don't really seem to desire ending their torture quickly. But when Batman pops up, someone who is notorious for taking down criminals, I think you should absolutely have a gun, especially their leader. He's been a demon since Bruce was 12? You're telling me he wouldn't have a gun on him at this point? And think, if you attempt to kill Batman now, that decreases the chance of your operations getting busted, not to mention the amount of street credit and reputation you would get from that. The antagonists are almost treated like a new addition to the city, like this is their first time here, despite being around for decades. You should know how much of a threat Batman is. This issue opens the door to a much broader topic. It would make sense not to kill Batman if the motivation were, if we keep him alive, he may be able to take out rival gangs, making it easier for us to take over enemy territory. The only caveat being, you need as little conflict with him and the police as possible. Keep your operations low-key and avoid any unnecessary attention. It would be fantastic if that were the case here, but unfortunately, there is no such reason behind these actions, making these street demons look rather stupid. The build-up to this confrontation is simple. It's just the actions taken by these men don't make much sense in the grand scheme of things. It's also important to analyze Batman's actions here. Yes, he could have thrown down a smoke bomb or phosphor flare and dispatched the demons very easily. Except here he needs to get the message across that going after these kids will bring them into his crosshairs. So only taking out those who attack him, on top of their leader, emphasizes that the remaining demons who have yet to do any real harm will spread the word, as it would be wise to remain in the good graces of Batman. So letting these demons flee makes sense for Batman's character, as it guarantees the safety of these kids, knowing full well that he's instilled fear in the remaining goons. After that, Batman warns that if these kids don't get smart, they will end up like those unconscious demons. At this point, the kids' rose-tinted glasses have been removed. They now realize that just because the demons said they were friends or provided them money for a short amount of time doesn't mean they are legitimate allies. They realize that they were merely being used and would be stabbed in the back at the first sign of betrayal. The next day, the principal from earlier announces to the kids that if they graduate high school, Bruce Wayne will pay for their full trip to college. Bruce enters the room to reassure the kids that he's there to give them an opportunity that most people would never get. He's been given so much in his own life. Now he just wants to give others the chance he had. As he exits the room, the principal warns that it will take more than money to get these kids going. He'll have to get to know them, and Bruce reassures that they'll be able to lean on him for support. The principal asks why Bruce is doing this in the first place, and he simply replies that it's his turn to play fairy godmother. Lastly, we get a few final lines from Batman as he stands on the roof of the school. He reflects on the fact that money won't guarantee all of these kids will make better choices, but if it helps just one kid, it would all be worth it. Final lines that further reinforce one of Batman's core drives. Yes, some of what he does can turn out to be pointless. Not everyone can be saved, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't try. If he can change something for the better, then he will absolutely try, which is a core theme of the character that I think is driven home here and throughout his history. It's in Batman's nature to believe people can always do better and get better, achieve more when given the opportunity. Veering away from street demons for just a second, a common criticism tossed at Batman constantly is that he doesn't use his influence and wealth as Bruce Wayne to improve the city, when in all reality, it's quite the opposite. Street Demons is just one of many stories that disprove this notion that Batman merely beats on the poor and mentally ill because he can't help himself. Given the poor state of Gotham, it would be wise to attack crime at the root, stop it before it can even happen. You do this by using your vast wealth and resources to better the city. Batman, ever since the late 1970s, has been doing exactly that. Through the Wayne Foundation and with his own personal money, Bruce Wayne has attacked crime at its roots. He's created multiple charities and organizations for the less fortunate, investing in low-income housing, giving jobs to the homeless, and supporting those who have suffered through a great deal of trauma in general. While so inconsequential and small scale, I believe this story encapsulates that central trait of Batman that many adaptations have completely missed out on. While it's not a mandatory thing to address, it's certainly something valuable to explore. What does Bruce think about using his wealth for stuff other than Batman? Does he think that there's any value going down that path? Exploring that facet of the character would help in adding more depth to Bruce because we're getting his perspective on more stuff. Him getting these kids through college tells us how valuable children are to him. A fairly consistent trait for Batman is whenever there is a kid that is hurt or traumatized, he takes that very personally. So when he reacts with anger or brutality, we can pull something super crucial out of that. Kids are innocent, and because he lost his innocence at such a young age, he is heavily protective of other children. It goes in line with the idea that he doesn't want anyone going through the same trauma he did. As the legend himself, Alan Grant, put it so eloquently in Shadow of the Bat, issue 13, I do it for the weak and the scared and the oppressed. I do it for the victims, the innocent, the abused. I do it to try to end the suffering, and I do it for the nobodies. Street Demons, while not perfect, is a strong story when it comes to character, world, and action. It strengthens the driving forces of Batman by showing us his more compassionate and vulnerable side. This creates a sense of relatability between the audience and Batman. Yes, most of us aren't in Bruce Wayne's position of wealth, but we can still relate to a need to help others. Maybe we want to help people because we may have experienced the same struggles they have. Perhaps many of us wouldn't want someone to suffer the same tragedies as us. I believe this story does a good job of creating that tie between the reader and the protagonist. The plot is really simple and doesn't really contain any massive gaps, with the only major issues being the demons themselves. It contains one of the best action sequences I've ever seen in a comic. It only lasts a page, but I believe it accomplishes quite a lot mechanically. It's certainly better than a good chunk of modern comic action and even material outside of the comics. But you knew that. This story really does hold a special place in my heart. The writer, Alan Grant, quickly became one of my favorite writers. When I think of Batman as a character at his peak, or a writer that understands him in the context of this continuity, it's him I think of. He can write Batman as aggressive and intimidating, but there's always an added soft side that makes him so charming. It also helps that he has artist Norm Brayfogle to further enhance the characters through body language and facial expression in most of his stories. While his plots most certainly aren't anything incredible, even containing gaps and contrivances at times, I believe he excels when it comes to character. As a conclusion to this portion of the video, I want to leave you guys with a quote from Alan Grant himself. In 2012, he did an interview with Trash Mutant, and he has this to say regarding Batman. I've left the full interview in the description. Batman is human. He's experienced the full gamut of human emotions. Grief, fear, rage, so he understands how people feel. It just made sense to me that he would be a man of huge compassion. I hope you guys enjoyed my breakdown of this neat little Batman story. Not taking on this colossal, multiple hour, multiple video project is a really nice change of pace. In terms of major changes to the channel, I really am going to try to upload monthly, at the very least. For those of you who don't know, about 5 months ago, I got a job and also started my senior year of high school. So having very little free time has really motivated me to work on writing, reading, watching whatever with the limited time I have. In the background, I already have quite a few videos in the pipeline for 2022. I'd also like to clarify that the coverage of Tom King's run will still carry on. I'll just be working on that series on the side while I release smaller scale videos. As always, please feel free to share your thoughts on the video in the comments. Are there any suggestions you have for editing, scripting, or delivery? I really want to experiment with what does and doesn't work, and if there's something you guys think I can improve on, by all means tell me. Thumpcast, Instagram, Discord, and now Twitter will be linked as per usual. I know almost 2 years ago now I said I wouldn't be on Twitter, but the app is actually fun when you don't take it absurdly seriously, so I ended up making a new account. If you guys want updates on what I'm working on, what I'm watching, reading, playing, or even just general life updates, that's there for you. Before I leave you guys, once again, I just want to promote a debate I had with a really awesome content creator by the name of Splinter. Me and him talked about Arkham Origins for a good chunk of time, and it was such an awesome discussion. It's like the peak of debates for me because there was actual progress made on points, and he was just an all-around kind and pleasant guy to talk to. He does his own long-form breakdowns on stuff like the Telltale Batman games and the Arkham franchise. Both the debate and his channel will be linked, so feel free to check that out to scratch that analytical itch. Saying this is always one of my favorite parts of making a video, but as always, feel free to leave a like only if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe only if you want more of my content. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one.
I've been so alone ever since I left the tribe. That's just how it goes, guess I like the lonely vibe. But they'll never know, cause I'm always on my grind. And I